All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out for the update on SBC 2024. Something happened a while back in the Southern Baptist Convention is we realized, I say we, somebody realized that Baptists had no idea what the Southern Baptist Convention was. Southern Baptists didn't know, and a lot of Southern Baptist pastors didn't know. And so they made a rule that every seminary student has to take a course on the cooperative program of the Southern Baptist Convention to teach about the cooperative program. And a lot of you probably grew up in a time where you got a lot of that. You know, back in the day, you probably heard if you grew up in a Southern Baptist church, but there's not as much anymore. And so how many of you have ever been to a Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting? All right, I know you have. You've been? Okay. How many of you have ever been to one of the state convention meetings? Have you been to those? Okay, some of you have been to those. Well, the Southern Baptist Convention is not like most denominations. It is a convention of churches. It's actually technically not even a denomination. And what that means is you don't join it. They don't have any authority over churches. You hear about us kicking churches out. That's actually not quite accurate because you can't come in. What you can do is you cooperate. You become a cooperating church by two ways basically. Is your church has to give money, and your church has to vote in some way to affiliate formally with the Southern Baptist Convention and become cooperative with the Southern Baptist Convention. Our convention actually only exists once a year, and that's during the annual meeting. The rest of the time, business is handled through our entities and through the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is what we call our home office. And the home office is in Nashville, but the headquarters, we say this a lot, and it's really true, the headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention is a local church. This is where the work gets done. And as such, we as churches who are in cooperation with the Southern Baptist Convention can send messengers. And we have a big meeting, and basically all it is a huge 2-day business meeting. And some of you are thinking, that sounds miserable. And Tam and I sat next to each other going, this is really cool. So we're kind of nerds for that process, procedural stuff, and really enjoy it. I think it's a fascinating process. Each church can elect and send messengers, and there's a formula for that based on the percentage of your undesignated receipts. For one thing, every Southern Baptist church gets 2 messengers. And then you get an additional messenger for each percent of your undesignated receipts that you give to the cooperative program. We give 10%. So that entitles us to 12 messengers, which is the maximum that any church can take. There's also a dollar formula. I think it's for every $6,000 the church sends to the cooperative program, they get a messenger. But no church gets more than 12 messengers. When you elect messengers, you don't tell your messengers how to vote. That's not how Baptists do things. And so messengers go and vote their conscience. And you would hope you would elect people who are representative of your church and where your church is doctrinally and missionally and all that kind of thing. This year, the meeting was held in Indianapolis, and there were almost 11,000 messengers from Southern Baptist churches there. When I started going to the SBC about 25 years ago maybe, we were seeing like 5,000 to 7,000, but back in the controversial years, 79, 80, 81, they would have like 45,000 show up. But this was a good year. Last year in New Orleans, it was about 13,000. It does depend on where it is geographically, because, and really Indianapolis is a great place because it's sort of middle of the country, but it's not in the South. So when you have it in the South, typically your numbers will be a little bit higher because that's where most of our churches are. And when you have it at some place like Orlando, your numbers go up because people want to go to Orlando, you know. So this is what the room looked like this year. So you can see it's just a great, when I say a big business meeting, it's in the convention center and it is big. And I'm going to point out one little thing to you, and I'll come back and talk about it in a minute. You see this number 6 here? Okay, just file that away. I'm going to come back and talk about that number 6 and some other such numbers in just a minute. But this is a lot of people. So there were actually, what was it, around 13,000 people in attendance. So you have messengers. You also have the press there. And there's a big press section, like right down in the center, just a couple of sections back. A lot of press, all your religion outlets, but they also have, state papers. The state Baptist conventions have their press. You'll have the national news media there and all that kind of thing. And so you'll have the press there. You have the exhibitors who are there. So there's a huge exhibit hall. And in that exhibit hall, you have the seminaries will have exhibits, Baptist colleges, but even ministries that aren't technically affiliated with the SBC can come and pay for exhibit hall space. In fact, this is where we met. You remember Zach Mears, the illusionist that came to our church? That's where we first met him. Is he had an exhibit at the SBC. And so you get that, and it's a lot of fun just going around and seeing the exhibits. And I mean, you can buy you a church van there. You can, it's big, isn't it, Tam? It's big. But you also have guests. So, for example, if you want to go, but we've already elected our 12 messengers, you can go and register as a guest. The only thing it means is that you don't get to vote. And so some people will do that. And a lot of people bring their kids. And you say, why in the world would they bring your kids? Well, that's what I always thought. But they do have both a children's and a youth event going on at the convention for them the whole time. But you'll see kids in the business meeting, but they're wearing their visitor tags, and so, or their guest tags, or whatever they call it. So when you add the guests, the exhibitors, and the press, that number goes up quite a bit. So there's a lot of voting going on, and when you register as a messenger, you get a packet, and you've got the annual book of reports. So like you've got the detailed financial, it's a thick book. You get the detailed financial reports from all of our entities and committee reports and all the statistics, and it's got the bylaws in it, and it's got all this kind of stuff in it, but you get a ballot, and your ballot is a very precious thing. So it's actually a book of ballots, and you can see that's what people are holding up. And it's a different color every year because they don't want you cheating. Not that anybody would cheat, but most of our votes are taken by raising a ballot. All those in for, raise your ballot. All those against, raise your ballot. But if it's too close to call, then you'll do a written ballot. And for all the elections, for officers, which I'll talk about in just a second, you'll do a written ballot, and it's fascinating. I mean, you got 11,000 people there, and somebody's counting all those votes. And so it's a booklet, and it's got little perforated tabs, and you tear it out, and it's got numbers across the top, and they'll say, if you're voting this way, put an X on number 1. If you're voting that way, an X on number 2. Or if it's just a yes or no, they have yes or no boxes. And it's funny, they disallow ballots every time because people can't follow the instructions. I don't understand how they can't follow. Put an X in this box, but apparently it gets complicated. So you see a lot of this. You see the room with all these raised ballots a lot, and that's what's going on. So when you go to the meeting has some great worship. This year worship, there's a convention worship leader every year. This year it was Joseph Kreider, who's the head of the music department at Southwestern Seminary over in Fort Worth. And he had his Southwestern team there, and the worship was it was amazing, wasn't it, Tam? It was so good. And so you got several worship sessions through there that'll have, 3 or 4 songs that you do, a worship set. There's a couple of sermons. There's an annual convention sermon. And so like this year, we elected the convention preacher for next year, and then the president gets to make an address. And I thought we heard a really good sermon when Jeff Orge gave his report for the executive committee. But most of what we do there is business. Most of those 2 days are filled with business, and there's a lot of business to do with an organization our size. So the various things we do in the business session is everybody's favorite is introduction of new motions. And there are 2 different times. You get an agenda every day, and you also get an app. It's a great app that has everything on it, really easy to work. But there are 2 times on day 1 called introduction of new motions. Or is it introduction of new business? One of those 2. And that is your opportunity where any messenger, I showed you that number 6, There were 10, I think, this year, microphones around the room. You go to a microphone. I'm going to show you how that works in a second. But if you get called on, you can make a motion. They've also started a new thing, and you can even do this right through the app, or you can go online and do it, but you can pre-file a motion. So it's really helpful if you do that, because what they do is they take all the pre-filed motions, and if you actually get an opportunity to make it, they put it on the screen. They've got it ready, so they put it on the screen so you can actually look at it and read it, and it's really, really helpful. So what happens when you make a motion, though, let's say you guys go next, one of you goes next year and says, I'm going to make a motion about something. You make a motion, you make the motion, you've either pre-filed it or you have a copy of it, and you give it to a page, and the page runs it up to the platform. And then you go sit down. Nothing happens with your motion. Because what happens is after every time there's an introduction of new motions, the Committee on Order of Business goes and meets. And they decide what to do with the motions. Well, what do you mean they decide what to do with the motions? Well, we have Robert's Rules of Order. We also have convention rules that we vote on right off the bat. You get a list of them, and like some of the rules are, hey, if a motion is made about this, it's going to be automatically referred to this committee. And so what happens is they will come back later and say, okay, so-and-so made this motion, or they'll say, these 5 motions were made, and they'll put them on the screen. Those have all been referred to the Executive Committee. These have all been referred to the trustees of the North American Mission Board. And then they'll say the following motions are ruled out of order. Now, out of order is not an insult. You're out of order. Out of order simply means it's not an appropriate motion according to Robert's Rules of Order. So, you know, I've heard, before I ever went to convention, I heard, oh, they tell people they're order. Well, they do. All that means is procedurally, this is an inappropriate motion. You've made a motion to, somebody made a motion to fire one of our entity heads. That's actually not a motion. You can make the motion, but it's not a motion that we can vote on because our boards of trustees make the decisions about who the employees are. And so they'll do that, and then there actually aren't that many you get to vote on. Most of them get referred out. And a lot of times when somebody makes a motion, that's what they want to do. I make a motion that the Executive Committee consider this. That motion has been referred to the Executive Committee. I make a motion to amend the bylaws. That is automatically and they know that going in, but that's how you get something done. And then what they'll do is the Committee on Order of Business is say the following motions have been scheduled for debate at 8:40 tomorrow morning. And so you come at 8:40, and then they put the motion out there, and that's when the person who made it gets to speak for it, and then anybody else can speak against it, and they go back and forth, and it's just a regular business meeting. Another thing that happens during the meeting is we get reports from all our entities. So what are the official entities of the Southern Baptist Convention? We get reports from the International Mission Board, the North American Mission Board, from the presidents of each of our 6 seminaries, and from the president and CEO of the Executive Committee. So the Executive Committee, remember, that's where all the work takes place in Nashville on behalf of the convention. So the guy that runs that is called the president and CEO of the Executive Committee. That's the top office in the SBC. He'll give a report on the Executive Committee and just on the SBC in general a lot of times. We hear a report from WMU, even though WMU, which is Women's Missionary Union, is not an official entity of the SBC. It's considered an auxiliary of the SBC. And then we hear reports from various committees that have been doing work. And sometimes a motion is made. We want to form a committee to do this. So a committee gets formed, and they're supposed to bring a report back at the annual meeting in 2026. So they come and give their report, and it may have recommendations to vote on, and it may not. And so we hear all of those reports. After a report, though, they open the microphones up, and people get to ask questions. And sometimes it's just real, hey, I'd just like to know, how do we do this? And sometimes they're mad about something, and it's not so much a question as an accusation or something like that. And so it can be kind of interesting when that happens. Some of the committees actually automatically bring, like the The Committee on Committees brings a recommendation for who to put on the committees. So we vote on, and you've got the list all laid out there way ahead of time. And I've actually seen members, I don't know if a member of a committee, maybe, well, let me back up. One of the committees that the Committee on Committees recommends is the Committee on Nominations. I've served on that before. The Committee on Nominations nominates the people to serve on the boards. Like all of our seminaries, North American Mission Board, International Mission Board, Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, they all have boards of trustees. So we vote on who the trustees will be. And I've actually been in a business meeting where somebody said, hey, this person shouldn't be serving on that board, and I vote to remove their name and replace it with this person. And so, you know, you can go through that kind of thing. I will tell you that almost all the business done, almost everybody in the room has a sweet spirit, but not everybody in the room has a sweet spirit. Some people are mad and have agendas, and they're coming and they're bringing all that. Another thing we do is there is a committee on resolutions. And so there's a date people can submit resolutions. And I'll tell you what a resolution is, but they can submit a resolution. The committee they'll adapt, they'll draft resolutions, and they bring them to the floor for a vote. Now, what's a resolution? A resolution is basically a non-binding statement. And so what I mean by non-binding is, I mean, for one thing, none of the churches have to abide by anything that the SBC says. We're all autonomous, but it's not binding on our institutes, of our entities, agencies, anything like that. But what it is it's a statement. And frequently, well, there's always, the last one is always, like we were in Indianapolis, a resolution on appreciation to the city of Indianapolis, you know. And so that's a short resolution. But what it does typically is it speaks to certain cultural issues that we're dealing with at the time. And we as messengers get to vote to make a clear statement. And a resolution has a bunch of whereases and resolved. Whereas this and this and this and this. Whereas there is gender confusion. Whereas there is, you know, this and that. Be it resolved. And be it further resolved. And so that's the kind of cultural issue we might speak to. There were two resolutions that were very contentious. And I'm going to tell you about the more headline-making stuff in a minute. But we deal with the resolutions. And I think the most frustrating thing, at least for me, is people submit a resolution, and they'll either take it or not, but the committee gets to decide what to bring to the floor, and they spend hours crafting these things with verbiage, and they go over it and over it, but somebody always wants to make them better. You know, I move to strike this line and add this line. And honestly, half the time the committee says, we receive that as a friendly amendment. You know, because why fight about it if it says the same? But sometimes they'll say, no, we don't think that's good language. And my position usually is I'm going to go with the people that have really spent hours and hours dealing, unless there's good reason not to, and I've never seen that for myself. Another thing we vote on are nominations and elections of officers. Well, what are our officers? We've got a president, a first vice president, a second vice president, a recording secretary, and is there another one?
The registrar, registration.
Or is that what I'm thinking? Instead of the recording, is it the registrations? No, recording secretary and the registration. And the registration every year is unopposed. It's a guy named Don Currents. And y'all, one of the best things about going to SBC is Don Currents. He's had this position for like 30 years. And so what he does is Terry has actually served on the registration committee. And so they're the ones, when you go to register, they're the ones dealing with that. If there's an issue with your registration, they resolve it and all that kind of stuff. And so he's the guy that comes up every time a business session starts, and he tells you how many people have registered so far. And he's the one that if there's a written ballot, he's the one that comes up and gives the instructions. And he's about this tall, and he's the mayor of Ozark, Missouri. Is that right? I think Ozark was, it's just like a 2 years. So now he's known as the mayor. He's also known as Dandy Don, and he's just the sweetest, most congenial, happiest guy. And so nobody ever opposes him, and he just gets the vote, gets the job by acclamation. And I don't know why anybody would want the job, frankly. It's a hard job. He's the one responsible for counting all the votes. So he has his committee doing all of that. So whenever one of my least favorite things is hearing all the nominations for the officers, because everybody gets 3 minutes. And so they take over 3 minutes to make their nomination. But there's a guy, what's his name? Do you remember? I can't remember his name. There's always a guy that whenever there's a clock on anything, he stands back there. He's always in a suit. And when they got 30 seconds left or 20 seconds left, you see him going. And everybody in the room starts laughing, and whoever's talking is like, and he comes up, and when you got like 5 seconds left, he puts his hand on your shoulder. So people are all over the convention getting selfies with this guy with his hand on their shoulder, because it's a big thing now, and it's really funny. And fortunately, you couldn't find, okay. Fortunately, they end up cutting their mic off. You know, they'll give them like 5 seconds extra, but they cut their mic, because people, they're preachers. Oh, we don't know how to shut up. And so don't get any ideas. You're not cutting my mic off. But then we have the elections for officers and all that. And by the way, the officers, they're all volunteer positions. Nobody gets paid. I don't know why anybody would want to be the president of the SBC. But that's the person that's going to be on CNN and Fox News. And I mean, for one thing, nobody would ever ask me to do that. But if they did, I would turn it down. I would never do it. But I mean, these guys need to go to their churches and ask, like, hey, for the next 2 years, I'm going to be flying all over the country, and it's a big, hard job. They go to all the committee meetings. I mean, it's huge. By the way, the reason I keep pointing at Tam, for those of you that don't know, she's actually a member of the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is basically the board of trustees for our home office. And you've been on there 2 years now. You just finished your second year.
Love it.
And she loves it. She's good at it. And one of the things that's really cool is the executive committee meetings. Well, they're all open to the public, right? And but they always meet the day before the Southern Baptist Convention starts, so I go. And I love it. I love seeing what's going on in the executive committee meeting. And Tam actually serves on a subcommittee, and I go to that one too. And I went to the finance one this time, and so I like committee meetings. I like business meetings. One of the cool things we do, and they didn't used to do this. They started this, I don't know, a few years ago. But the International Mission Board now does their missionary sending services, their commissioning services at the SBC. And how many of y'all have ever been to an IMB commissioning services? Maybe, okay, because they normally have done them in mega churches around the country and like that. And I don't know if they still do any or not, but they do one at the SBC every year. And this year we commissioned 83 new missionaries, and it's really cool because what they do, and they're really good, they get to go up and they'll have 2 places on the platform, and somebody's always waiting and somebody's always talking. And what's it, like 30 seconds they get? I'm so-and-so, this is so-and-so, we're going here, please pray for this. And a couple of things that really impress me is, one, the number of people my age that are going as full-time missionaries, and they'll say, pray for our grown children and our grandchildren, we're leaving them. And that's a big deal. And a lot of these people are saying, pray for our families because we're taking our family of 6 and we're moving over. But I would say at least 2/3 did their thing like this, because they're going to places you can't send missionaries, where they could be arrested, where they could be killed. And they don't even let them speak. Somebody else, you see a guy on the left there, he's speaking, he's doing their thing for them. Because they don't even want their voices recorded. Because, there's technology now where you can do that. I would say at least 2/3 of our missionaries were behind a screen where that's all we could see. And I think we all just sit there and weep the whole time this is going on. And it's just really, really moving. There was one deaf couple that they did their thing, and they put the transcript on the screen. And so they faced each other behind the screen and were signing to each other, and that was really cool. They had a couple of people that did their thing not in English. And they were, I think both of the ones that did that were Asians, and so they put the translation on the screen so that we could read it. And y'all, they're going all over the world, and we're sending them all over the world. And you and I are helping to pay their salaries and provide for them. In fact, I had coffee with a guy who's in a pipeline with a mission organization this week that is not Southern Baptist. He has to raise all his support, but he grew up on the mission field with this organization that he's going back with. And he said, yeah, the Southern Baptists always had the nice cars. Because we do give them good transportation. We give them a good place to live. We educate their children. We provide for their medical care. They don't have to spend any of their time raising money. They get to spend their time doing mission work, and it's a really great thing that we get to be a part of. So let's talk about some of the controversy. I don't know if you saw any of the headlines coming out of there. Some of that I'm going to talk about made headlines, some of it didn't. One of the controversies is we have, one of our entities is called the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. It used to be called the Christian Life Commission, for those of you back in the day. And they had their home offices in Nashville, but they also have a full-time office within walking distance of the Capitol in D.C. And so what they do is they advocate for Southern Baptists on issues of ethics and religious liberty that are important to Southern Baptists. The sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage, all religious liberty issues. They write friend of court briefs for federal cases and state cases and Supreme Court cases, and they write policy papers to give to Congress people and senators so that they can see what our reasoning is, and they distribute those to churches. You can get on their email. I get their emails, and they say, hey, these are the things we're watching right now. They'll say, hey, you may wonder what this Supreme Court case actually means in real terms, and they're really doing great work. But for the past 5 years, somebody has made a motion to disband the ERLC. And it's been defeated overwhelmingly every time. And in case you're wondering, in case you saw anything about that, there are two main issues with what's going on. So the pro-life cause is actually fighting among itself right now. Because forever and ever, what we have tried to do as pro-life people, and what the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission has done forever and ever, is let's get laws passed any kind of laws we can to have fewer abortions. And it's an approach we call incrementalism. In other words, if we can it's a victory. Like if we could get California to say, okay, no abortions after 12 weeks, that would be considered a victory. Any kind of restriction, any kind of limitation we can get out there. But there is a new movement now called the abolition movement. By the way, every pro-life person I know wants to see abortion abolished. We want it gone. We want it in the ash heap of history. We want to talk about that in shocking terms like we talk about chattel slavery now. Like, can you believe that used to be a thing? We all want that. But the abolitionists are opposed to an incrementalist approach. And therefore, they see the ERLC as pro-abortion. In fact, some of the language they use online is the ERLC wants as many abortions as possible, which is just, frankly, dumb. It's not the case. And some of these people are upset because they have advocated against some of the abolition, which also calls for the imprisonment of women who've had abortions. And some even the death penalty for women who have abortions. I believe someday, I'm hopeful someday that abortion will be a crime, and that it will be a crime for a woman to have an abortion, but we are not there yet. And so the ERLC has opposed these most extreme of the abolition laws, which therefore is interpreted as they are pro-abortion. They are not pro-life. So that is one of the issues. Another issue is, and I don't want to get into all the history, but if you know anything about Baptists, you know that Baptists have always been were always in our history a persecuted people. Baptists had to flee England. When Baptists came to America for freedom of religion, they were persecuted in all the colonies because all the people wanting freedom of religion came and set up their colonies and made their own official state churches. But it wasn't the Church of England, so it was their own thing. And the Baptists were the ones that were always getting persecuted. And therefore, Baptists have always been very strong advocates for religious liberty for everyone. You go look at old writings, and They talk about even for the Muslims, they called them back then, or for the Turks, they would call them back then. And here's the reasoning. It's not that Baptists think those are valid religions. It's that Baptists have always said the government should not be in the business of telling you what is right and wrong to believe. The government should not dictate the conscience. I believe that 100%. And I want you to think about it. If Christianity were the official religion, well, maybe it's the official religion today, but who's going to get in office years down the road? Or if Baptists are the favored religion, maybe not later. And things started going downhill because of the ERLC about, 7 or 8 years ago, I guess, submitted a friend of the court brief to the Supreme Court because there was a group that wanted to build an Islamic community center in a town in New Jersey that allows for Christian places to be built but would not allow for an Islamic place. And they wrote a friend of the court brief on behalf of them saying, we've got to have religious liberty for everybody. Rumor came out then, so Southern Baptists, this is what I actually saw, Southern Baptists are now building mosques. It's maddening, y'all. Southern Baptists, nobody at the ERLC is pro-Islam. What they are is anti-government having official state religions. So now, this same group, they don't like the incremental approach to abortion because they think that means they're pro-abortion, and they don't like that the ERLC is advocating for religious liberty for all. Okay? And that's going to lead into one of the controversial things. Anyway, case is made, it was defeated, it's been defeated 4 or 5 years in a row, and this is something we can vote on, so it comes to a vote, but to abolish one of our entities, it has to pass 2 years in a row, and it's not, it was over 90%, so anyway. So those were some that was a contentious issue, is trying to get rid of the ERLC. The next were 2 resolutions. Remember, resolutions are non-binding, but there was a resolution titled On Defending Religious Liberty. That we oppose any efforts to an official state church. And it was really disappointing to see how many Baptists opposed that. Because there is, and I know this term is used a lot and misdefined, but there is a movement of Christian nationalists today, even in the SBC, that want they want Christianity to be the official religion. Some of the things they're saying, you look, there's one guy that I could call his name, but I won't, who's very prominent in the SBC. He wants blasphemy laws, like the government to pass laws that there is a criminal penalty for blasphemy. They want to restrict immigration only to Christians. And some of this extreme stuff. So there was a resolution, like I said, resolutions deal with stuff going on in the culture, that we who have always defended religious liberty need to make a statement that we don't think the state ought to dictate the conscience. There was a lot of debate on it, and it passed probably 99%. Fortunately, I was glad to see most of the Baptists in the room are still Baptists. And the other one, this is one that made headlines. It was called On the Ethical Realities of Reproductive Technologies and the Dignity of the Human Embryo. This is where you may have seen a headline that Southern Baptists now oppose in vitro fertilization. False. False. Here's what the statement said. By the way, this was approved overwhelmingly. Here's what the statement said. In vitro fertilization, frequently, not always, numerous eggs are fertilized. Like sometimes a dozen eggs be fertilized. They'll implant some. The woman gets pregnant, they freeze the rest. And what do they do with them? Frequently, they are destroyed. Let me tell you, the resolution didn't even say, and I'm not going to read the resolution, it's really long, you can go Google it. You can get it online. If you can't find it, I'll find it and send it to you. All it said is there are ethical concerns with the disposition of unused embryos that we need to draw attention to. That's all it said. That's like all it said. Because we have Baptists, as Baptists, have been very clear that we believe life begins at conception, at the fertilization of an egg, that's where life begins. By the way, if it doesn't begin there, when? When do you get to decide? When do you get to draw that line? And therefore, I think the overwhelming consensus is you don't create embryos and then just destroy them. Or you don't just freeze them, not having any idea what's ever going to happen to them. That might be carried. And it wasn't even speaking as strongly as I am about it. It was just saying there are some ethical concerns that we need to be concerned about. And so some people have been really, oh, but I have my kids with IVF. Why are Southern Baptists against that? We're not. We're not. We're against creating an excess of embryos that are going to be disposed of. But again, the resolution wasn't even as strong as that. So you know that the news media is going to take the headlines and run with it, and people are going to cast things in the worst light. So I just wanted you to know what that was about. The next thing has to do with women in ministry. You may have seen headlines, as I did, that Southern Baptists are now ordaining women to be pastors. First obvious thing there is the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't ordain anyone, ever. Local churches ordain people, period. If you've ever been to an ordination in a Southern Baptist church, the church has done that. The denomination has nothing whatsoever to do with it. But let me explain what this is all about. Our Baptist Faith and Message in the section on the church has this sentence: while both men and women are gifted for service in the church, the office of pastor, elder, overseer, those three terms are used interchangeably in Scripture. The office of pastor, elder, overseer is limited to men as qualified by Scripture. I'm going to read that again. While both men and women are gifted for service in the church, the office of pastor, elder, overseer is limited to men as qualified by Scripture. This is nothing new. Southern Baptists have always believed that men are supposed to be the pastor of the church. This was added to the Baptist Faith and Message in the year 2000 when the Baptist Faith and Message was revised. So it wasn't in there before that, and it is in there now. And when it was put in there, the people on the Baptist Faith and Message Revision Committee, when questioned, said, does that include associate pastors, children's pastors? Their answers, which are in writing and in the public record, where we are talking about the lead pastor of a church. That's what they were saying. A couple of years ago, it came out that there were some churches in the SBC that had female lead pastors. Now, I told you we can't kick churches out, but what we can do is deem them as not in friendly cooperation. And if they are not in friendly cooperation, that means they don't get to seat messengers. Now, by the way, they can still send all the money they want. They can come as guests, but they don't get to seat messengers, which means they don't get a vote at our annual meeting. There's some criteria to be in friendly cooperation. You have to, I forget how the language is exactly, but you have to be in substantial agreement with our Baptist Faith and Message. Doesn't say you have to agree with everything, but you mostly need to be in line with that. So what we did 2 years ago is we deemed, I want to say kicked out, it's just easier, but we don't really kick anybody out. We deemed 6 churches as being not in friendly cooperation because they had female pastors. Now, the way that happens is somebody has to report that church to what we call the Credentials Committee. The Credentials Committee examines, did they really have a female pastor? Or do they have beliefs that don't align with us or whatever? Then they make a recommendation to the Executive Committee. We don't believe this church should be in friendly cooperation. The Executive Committee then votes. Now, if the Executive Committee says, yeah, we agree that this church is not in friendly cooperation, that's settled unless the church wants to appeal that decision. So if the church wants to appeal that decision, they can seat messengers. And can they seat messengers? Maybe they can't seat messengers. But they get an opportunity to come to a microphone and they get 3 minutes to appeal. Two of the churches last year appealed. One was Rick Warren, because Rick Warren retired, and the co-pastors are a man and a woman. They replaced him. So he appealed. He lost his appeal. The messengers voted to deem them as not in friendly cooperation. And the other was a church called Fern Creek Baptist Church in Virginia, and their pastor, who is a woman, made what I thought was actually a very friendly and impassioned appeal, but she lost the appeal. We deemed her or that church as not in friendly cooperation, so they're no longer Southern Baptist churches. They no longer can seat messengers. And then the other churches didn't even they didn't come and appeal the decisions at all. That year, we also deemed a church as not in friendly cooperation because they have a pastor who's a convicted sex offender. And we've spoken pretty clearly about that we really don't want you guys affiliating with us if you do that. This year, we also removed, I'm using the wrong language because frankly, it's just the language we use when we're having conversations, but I want to be accurate. We deemed a church as not in friendly cooperation because they actually changed their doctrine, their own doctrinal statement, to say that they do support women as pastors. They don't have a woman pastor, but they actually released a public statement that says, we do not agree with the Southern Baptist Convention on this issue. So they made an appeal. They lost the appeal. They were deemed as not in friendly cooperation. Frankly, it's become a bigger issue than it ought to be, in my opinion. There's a couple of groups out there that keep talking about how the Southern Baptists are becoming liberal. Look at that. We had 6 female pastors out of 43,000 churches. Look at the liberalism. Okay, number one, having a female pastor does not necessarily mean you're liberal. Number two, y'all, the Southern Baptist Convention is not liberal, it's not drifting liberal, it's not trending liberal, it's the opposite of liberal. But if you look at the scale where, liberals over here and, the far left is over here, the far right is over here, the Southern Baptist Convention is here, but we got some guys way over here. And everybody to the left of them is liberal, okay? I've been called liberal. So, here's what happened. I'm giving you, that was all background information, all right? Last year, 2 years ago, somebody recommended amendment to our bylaws. Now, if you go to the floor and you make a recommendation to amend the bylaws, it automatically goes to the executive committee. The executive committee can say no. Or the executive committee can say, well, let's put it to the convention for a vote. This was one of the hardest decisions I think y'all have ever had to wrestle with, because if you said no, it's just going to come back up and y'all were going to be overruled probably so that we could vote on it. Probably. So they said, we're going to put it to the floor for a vote, but we're going to speak against it. Here's what the amendment said. In the section that talks about being in friendly cooperation, here's the statement, and it's got several bullet points under it. You got to be in alignment with our statement of faith. You got to give, so forth, several things. Here's the general statement. The convention will only deem a church to be in friendly cooperation with the convention and sympathetic with its purposes and work, i.e., a cooperating church, as that term used in the convention's governing documents, so a church is only in friendly cooperation if it meets the following criteria. Here's the amendment that the guy that was named Mike Law, so it became known as the Law Amendment. Affirms, appoints, or employs only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture. Now, by the way, since we had to vote on this, it has to be voted on twice, and it has to get 2/3 vote to pass. So 2 subsequent years, it has to get 2/3. So it's a 3-year process. Changing your bylaws ought to be hard. So last year, when this came to the floor, we raised our ballots. They said, yeah, that's 2/3, it's moving on. I wasn't convinced it was 2/3. Regardless, got to come back this year, it only got 61%. Had to get 66 2/3, only got 61%, so it failed. I voted against it. I want to tell you why I voted against it. I do not believe that women should be the pastor of a church. I have theological reasons. I have biblical reasons. I think the Bible speaks to that. I don't think it's that fuzzy on it. Here's what's happened since this amendment came forward. Remember, you're not in friendly cooperation, not just if you have a female pastor, but any church that affirms, appoints, or employs only men as any kind of pastor or elder is qualified by Scripture. Well, we got rid of the churches, right? We deemed the churches not in friendly cooperation with female pastors. So these guys went out and scoured the Southern Baptist Convention database. They went to every website they could find of the 40 however many thousand churches. And they made a list of every church that has a female whose title has the word pastor in it. Women's pastor, children's pastor, worship pastor. However they used that term for pastor with a woman, and they came back and said, we have, I think the number's like 1,700 female pastors in the convention. Okay, let me stop there, and because you want to know, I'm going to tell you Mike's position on this, okay? I personally believe the term pastor, the title pastor should only be used for men, and only for men who meet all the biblical qualifications as laid out in Scripture. I also believe that across evangelicalism, the bar has been so low that any guy even who feels like he's called to be a pastor, church is just ordained. We're ordaining 21-year-old guys out there as pastors. We're ordaining when I say we, churches are ordaining 18-year-olds. The biblical qualifications, you read Titus and 1 Timothy, talk about maturity, good reputation, ability to teach, all these things. I think it's a high bar, okay? We have things we call like youth minister, children's minister, directors and stuff like that. None of that's in Scripture, and I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. It's just helpful terms that we use. But I only think you should use the term pastor for men who meet the qualification as pastor. That's Mike's position. So you need to know, I won't ordain women as pastors. And if we have a female children's, Kim and Rainer, they're part-time, we call them preschool and children's directors. But if we have a woman like full-time in that job, we're not going to call her the children's pastor. By the way, we hire some 25-year-old guy right out of college to be our next youth guy. We're not going to call him a youth pastor until we get to know that he meets qualification to be ordained as a pastor. So that's Mike's position. I'm going to tell you what else is Mike's position. If there's some church in the town over that has a female women's pastor, I think it's an unwise use of the term. I don't think they should automatically be excluded from the Southern Baptist Convention. That's my take on it. You feel free. Hey, y'all, anybody can disagree with me about anything. You're welcome to disagree with me. I'm not going to be offended if you disagree with me about that. I baptized my grandson at a Southern Baptist church 2 weeks ago. How many of you saw the video on social media? Did you see the woman there with the microphone helping me out? That was their children's pastor. That's her title, children's pastor. I got to tell you, I'd hire that woman like that. She was impressive. I wouldn't call her a children's pastor. We heard a solid expository sermon. We've seen the real discipleship this church is doing. Their doctrine is so conservative and good. I don't think they've thought through the terminology as much. They don't think a man ought to be the lead pastor of the church. So I made the comment on social media. I think to remove this church from cooperation would be ridiculous. Therefore, on social media, I was called stupid, liberal, gay, effeminate, neutered, retarded, and some terms that I will not repeat in public. That's the way the debate has gone. I'm not gay. If you think I'm liberal, you haven't been paying attention, okay? I'm not going to argue the stupid. But I don't think I am. But here's what would happen. Number one, we have a doctrinal statement in the Baptist Faith and Message. I don't think it's wise, personally, to put your pick certain pieces of your doctrine and put it in your bylaws, because then it becomes a legal issue that can actually land you in court. For example, what if we vote that this church isn't in friendly cooperation, but we don't vote that this church is. Well, we've got a legal problem now because those are our legal documents. I also don't think the language of this is wise because here's what a lot of the proponents have been saying. Even if the title is not pastor, if you have a woman serving in a function where she has any pastoral duties, you need to be deemed not in friendly cooperation. My attitude is, who gets to decide that if we're autonomous churches? What if we have what if somebody decides, hey, Raina's carrying pastoral functions. She led a meeting in that church where men were present. She shouldn't have, you may think I'm being absurd, this is the kind of talk that's out there. Or a church that affirms only men as any kind of pastor. What if somebody says, well, Mike doesn't think we should kick that church out. We think Central ought to be out of the SBC. I think it opens up a can of worms, but not only does it open up a can of worms, it makes it our bylaws, which makes us legally bound to make these decisions. Therefore, by the way, several people said, oh, I guess you want a gay person as your pastor next. What? The debate has gotten absurd. So anyway, if you heard or read that Southern Baptists are now, that the Southern Baptist Convention is ordaining women as pastors, literally, from when the Baptist Faith and Message was amended in 2000 to today, absolutely nothing has changed. Nothing. We're exactly where we were before this amendment was made, as having a statement that says only men should be the pastor. So don't buy any of that, and in a minute when I take questions, you can ask more questions about it. Those were the big controversial things. I was just going to show you, I showed you that number 6, I told you there's microphones all around. This is how you get to speak on the floor of the convention. There is this box there, and I love that they put Psalm 19:14, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. I thought they put that, but some people apparently didn't read it. So basically, when there's a motion on the floor, you can push the for button, and it's all computer generated. Whoever's first to pop up, they got a screen up there, and the moderator, people have accused the moderator, oh, he wouldn't call on me. He can't see anything there's 11,000 people in the room. And they have a monitor, and the the parliamentarian is standing behind the moderator, and he tells him, microphone 3 wants to speak for the motion. Microphone 3, do you want to speak for the motion? Yes. Go right ahead. And they're on a clock. I think they get 2 minutes for that. They can speak against a motion. There's the button you can push if you want to make a motion or amend a motion. And by the way, they don't call on anybody for or against. That jumps to the head of the line. Okay, somebody wants to make an amendment to this motion. What is it? Urgent request. Well, what in the world is an urgent request? If you believe, for example, that the moderator has violated the rules of order, you can push that and say, I have a point of order. And several people did that. And then the parliamentarian weighs in on it. And it was really funny because one guy made a point of order and said, you know, we can do this and we don't have to do that. And there's this, in Robert's Rules of Order says this and this and this. And so therefore this is how we should do it. And the parliamentarian came to the microphone and he said, Robert's Rules of Order does say that, but there's a footnote that says this and this and this. And he goes, I mean, I can go find the footnote if you want to. And the guy goes, yeah, I want you to find the footnote. So the guy grabbed have you ever seen Robert's Rules of Order? It's about that thick. And he turned to the page and he read the footnote to him. I don't know who that guy is, but he is impressive. And then there's an other, and they'll just ask you, what are you wanting to say here? And sometimes I'll go to somebody and say, did you want to speak for the motion? And they'll say, no, I wanted to speak against it. Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Somebody else, is there anybody who wants to speak for it? And you get a for, you get an against. And another thing, an urgent request, I want to call for the question. And then we vote on whether we end debate and call for the question. So that's how that works. And here's what I want to tell you. With all of this, we have a system that actually works. It just works. And we're a grassroots organization, and the grassroots speak every time. And it's it's a cool thing to be a part of. It's a cool thing we get to be a part of. But I just want to encourage you, in the future, whenever you see headlines, ask somebody who was there, drill down a bit, figure out what's going on, and I think you'll find that it will be really healthy. Does anybody have any questions?